All right, welcome to the Max Effort Kitchen podcast. We have a great For the Love of Food show for you today. I am Matt. This is Sarah. We are your hosts for today. Sarah, how you doing? How's your
I'm,
weekend going?
it's going pretty good. I'm trying to get all the brain cells together in a cohesive form so I can properly speak. But,
Yeah.
Plan for World Domination is underway. Um,
Well, I will say that, and you made a good reference to this in pre-show, which is, your brain and my brain will make one solid, cohesive brain. So it's Saturday morning, people. We're having a good Saturday morning, but not quite wide awake. I don't know. Is that the right way
yeah,
to say that?
we're doing our best. We're doing our best.
I got all the drinks and supplements sitting right here, so I
I
think
got
I
just
think
like my line of different beverages to keep me
yes,
awake and
yeah,
functioning. You need to have at
exactly.
least three beverages at all times on hand.
I do agree with that. Okay, this is such an old man thing to talk about, and I'll throw it out there, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But really made a push, I don't know, about 2 months ago, to drink a lot of water, to make sure I'm getting the water I need on a daily basis. And I don't want to say traditionally, but historically, I didn't drink much water ever. So I was always dehydrated. But I now carry around this water bottle packed full of ice and water all day. I'm very picky about my water. And the only pickiness comes in is where I need it to be cold. I can't drink room temperature water. I don't know what that's about, but I need it to be like ice cold at all times. Do you have anything weird like that?
That's interesting. For me, water, not really. I can drink at any temperature, but I don't know why, but one of my earliest memories, this is so weird, but I was like 2, and I remember putting tons of ice in a glass of water and just waiting for the condensation to form on the outside of the glass. And I was all like, yes, it's perfect. It's all right now. Now I can enjoy my water. But I impatiently stared at it for like 10 minutes until the condensation reached its top point.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know.
I kind of like that. It's like kind of like a cursor to, okay, my water's ready. You know, yeah, I don't necessarily do the same thing, but like, I do get made fun of a lot because I have a mason jar at work that I use for my cup or whatever, and I like to fill that thing completely full of ice and then put the water in. And I'll come down, I'll sit like at the lunch table or whatever, and people are looking at me like, "Hey, why do you have a cup of ice right there?" And I'm like, "No, that's my ice water." Because and like I said, historically, I wasn't drinking water, so it would take me all day to drink it, and the ice would melt, and it would be great. But that's no longer. Now I have a water bottle, and I'm drinking almost a gallon a day, and I can't tell you that I'm actually feeling the benefits of it, but I'm pretty sure I am. I'm gonna guess. I don't know, I'm peeing a
I
lot
also
more.
have had that problem historically. I do
Okay.
not drink water. I just caffeinate. I'm just like
Yeah.
4 cups of coffee in. I mean, there's water in there, right? There's some
Uh,
water in there, a little bit.
yeah. I'll tell
Hydration?
you,
I don't know. I don't know.
caffeine is pretty much water, right? It's pretty
Yeah.
much water. We'll go with that. Well, Sarah, we have a pretty cool show set up for everybody today, and it's all about pickling. And I named this Pickling for the Soul. We're going to go down a little road of pickling. I know that in the past I've done pickling for health reasons and like fermentation and how all the gut biome and all that works. But today we're going to talk more about the culinary side of things. And, I got to say, so growing up, my mom would pickle a lot of things, but primarily she was pickling asparagus. She was pickling green beans, just kind of like very stuff that grew around the area. Corn. She would pickle corn, which, in fact, corn is a very interesting one because of the sugar content in it. But we'll go down that road a little later. But when I was a kid, I was like, I didn't understand it. It was almost like the taste buds hadn't fully developed yet, right? And so everything is, when you're a kid, everything is very, very, very bright. And when you put something acidic in your mouth, you're just like, oh, that's way too much. I see it with my kids. They call bubbly water spicy water, right? It's not really spicy, but it's like it's a little too intense for their taste buds. So, but she would make that stuff, and I did not like it. Did not like it. Did not like it. And then something happened around like 16 and 17. um, I'm living in a different place. My parents had split up and all that. And I'm living with my dad, and I went over to a friend's house, and these people were, or his parents were the type of people that lived off their land. Like, you would wake up and they had homemade brie cheese in a homemade bread bowl for breakfast. And I won't get into that story, but it was interesting.
That's an art form, though.
Right, totally. Well, they had some pickled onions and pickled asparagus laying around one day, and we were like, going through the kitchen, and I started eating them, and I was like, immediately something clicked, and there was this immediate satisfaction of what was going on. My mouth was watering. The like chlorophyll of the asparagus versus the acidity of the pickling juice and all that, and the texture on how it felt when I bit into it. It was a really it was a memorable experience, to the point where I can still, at 44 years old, tell this story. But that's the point in which I started to like pickling stuff. And now, I didn't go out and start pickling things in that moment, because at that time I was 16, 17, and all I cared about were sports and, whatever. Um, so fast forward later in life, going through culinary school, and I'm starting to learn the process of pickling. Now, for everybody out there, I'm sure you all know pickling is a preservation. It acts as two things: it's preservation and it's flavor enhancing. We see it all over the place. Probably most common, pickled onions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think pickled onions are great. I can sit there and eat a jar of pickled onions just like that. I mean, what? Let me ask you, what's your experience with pickling, like, at an early age?
Ooh, let's see. Well, when I was younger, I wasn't as into like the dill pickles, the more sour pickles, but I was obsessed with any sweet pickle, like red
Yes.
butter pickles. I would eat half a jar straight. Loved
Oh,
those
those
things.
things are candy,
They are.
right? Yeah.
Oh, there's so many fun recipes I want to try now that I've started looking into the science of pickling and stuff. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have a lot of fun. I think I need to buy another fridge, I will say.
You know what's good? A good little hack is get one of those little mini fridges, because you can stack those mason jars in there. But
That's a good
yeah,
idea.
the I guess the most common thing is what we buy at the store: pickles, right? Those are cucumbers in a pickling liquid, and the pickling, it's been around for a long time, right? The I don't even know where it started. I can't. I'm not going to fact check this or anything, but I know that it was used as a preservation deal. That's where it came from. They weren't thinking about flavoring back in the ancient days of pickling, right? They were like, how can I make this food last through the winter, or how can I make this food that I can eat through the winter? Because obviously, when you live off the land and you live in certain areas, winter is desolate. And so you need to have a stock of food. And you see it a lot with people that, maybe live a little bit more outside of the bigger cities or whatever, that they have these cabinets full of pickling. And I lived in rural Idaho, and so I had that. And we had the cabinet full of like pickling jars or pickling things that we would eat, not for survival by any means, but it was for the idea um, of having food that basically you could put on your shelf for a really long time, and that's what pickling is, right?
Yeah, it's like an extension of the seasons. You work with what you have to,
Ah,
extend whatever resources are available for the longest period of time. I did look into both the timeline of the two main methods of pickling, which is vinegar brine pickling and lactic acid fermentation pickling, which
yep.
are two separate entities that are almost like combined in the modern era under the same name, but their
Okay.
sciences and history are completely separate entities, which is really, really fascinating. Um, but it really is just a way of survival. That's what fermentation and preservation and pickling is at its core. It's a way of using the resources available to be able to last through the winter. It's basically pure human ingenuity because so
Hmm.
many of these things happened with complete trial and error and by accident thousands of years ago. Like
Right.
I know that fermentation side of pickling has existed since like 10,000 BCE, which is
Hmm.
crazy.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just absolutely crazy how these accidental collisions and moments were able to catalyze human evolution and lead us to this moment. And stuff like that just blows my mind.
Right. And that's I mean, that could be like 5 shows right there.
Yeah.
On just and I like how you used a phrase or a term ingenuity, because in the world of food, right? I guess you could break it up into almost two macro type things, which is one was for survival, and then it moves into the other, which was for uh, flavor and art.
Yeah.
That's being a little bit vague and broad. I understand, but there was a time when food wasn't thought of as this beautiful plate, perfectly, with everything perfectly placed and every sauce perfectly smeared on the plate, right? It was like, what are we having? How are we going to make it through the winter? So, I can appreciate pickling for that because it has evolved to a point where we go from this ideology of survival to how do we now we can enhance our flavors through this technique we built through survival. And I think that's really neat for me to take something with that kind of history and really like utilize it as a tool in the kitchen.
With fermentation in particular, I find it really interesting because with fermentation, you're like almost creating and sustaining a life form to then
Yes.
create and to then like sustain a life form. And I think that that's just such a beautiful, interesting thing because
Yeah.
like I mean, like with microorganisms and bacteria, you're feeding it and you're helping them evolve and thrive, and that's how fermentation occurs.
Correct.
Which then like, oh, I was thinking about it because as I was looking at the fermentation side of pickling, I was noticing that like because fermentation is very much tied to climate, temperature, resources. So you have like on such like in small scale communities historically there must have been just such like a personal and cultural like tie to fermentation practices in order to utilize the resources available and adapt to the climate, which is
Right.
mind-boggling.
Well, yeah, and I think that a really good example of that is kimchi, right?
Yeah.
Kimchi is cabbage, heavily salted cabbage. They put them in these big clay pots and then
Mm,
they bury them.
yeah.
And the burying was because of the climate and the temperature control. The clay pots were also helping the temperature control. You know, uh, Anybody who's listened to my podcast on any one of these shows, you hear me say it a lot. Everything is boiled down to the idea of time and temperature. And those two things right there are, in my opinion, some of the most important parts of any type of food development, any type of recipe development, any type of like when you're out there trying to create, like, maybe trying to make a pulled pork and you got this big, pork butt and you're like, well, what do I do? Well, it's time and temperature, right? Or a quick pickling, time and temperature, it's refrigeration, and it's high acidity. So everything I can always kind of narrow it down and really funnel it into two things, which is time and temperature. And that speaks very clearly to what we're talking about with pickling. Fermentation, I like that you brought that up because fermentation was the actual and still is considered the most natural way of a pickling process because it's using one ingredient, which is salt. We have salt in the ocean. So, you're probably thinking like, well, how did they use vinegar and all that stuff back then? Well, they didn't, because in the very beginning it was salt.
Yeah.
And salt is plays a very uh, different role in the whole fermentation process. But at the very basic level, it draws out moisture. That moisture creates bacteria. That bacteria starts to eat around the vegetable or whatever you're pickling, and then you get this harmonious like chemical reaction that starts happening. Now, if you try to eat kimchi 2 weeks in, it's going to be disgusting and you probably get sick. But you give kimchi 2 months, it's going to get a little bit better. You give it, a year, it's probably now, mind you, I'm not a kimchi fan, but it is probably going to be pretty darn good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's another really cool thing about fermentation is the amount of time that's put into it because there's so much care put into like this method of preservation. It's like a matter of patience and evolution. And then you get this beautiful end product that has this insanely deep flavor that you cannot cheat your way to. And
Right.
that is really cool.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because it's and you and I were just talking about this, right? Because you joined into an experiment of trying to do something with garlic,
Yes.
and you text me yesterday. You're like, "This is not working. Why is this not working?" And
And help,
we
please.
yeah, and we just dove into like what's going on and why the maybe you're using what? Why don't you talk about it a little bit?
So I found this really cool recipe that was supposed to be pretty beginner friendly for a honey a garlic fermented honey, which is really really interesting.
Yeah.
And the recipe seems really straightforward. It was just take your garlic cloves, put them in a jar, fill it with honey, and put it at room temperature away from sunlight for about 3 weeks or so. Well, 3 days in, the pressure inside my can got so high that honey started being forced out the top through the crevices of the lid. And I'm
Yeah.
just all like, well, I really don't want an exploding jar. That would not be fast to clean up.
Yes.
I will keep note of this for next time though, when I want to exact revenge upon somebody. But for now,
Yeah,
um,
and we talked through kind of some of the reasons why, and I guess the first kind of concept that I really first thing that came to mind was okay, you got lots of sugar in the honey
yeah,
and probably not enough garlic. And so I said, okay, well, why don't you take the garlic out, fill your jar with garlic, put the honey in, and that way you have the ratios right. Because ratios in the pickling process, in the fermentation process, is literally everything. And if you don't have your ratios off, you're going to have different what am I trying to say? Microorganisms. Sorry, had a little brain fart there. A little bit of you're going to have too many of those or the wrong ones, or you're going to have too much sugar, which is going to cause for it to overflow. And what that is we have natural yeast in the air, right? And so you're leaving that thing at room temperature. You have this thing of sugar, and it's starting to create a chemical reaction with the allium in the garlic, and it's saying we have this beautiful. It's like when you walk up to a beautiful orange tree and you just start picking the oranges off, right? Because they're like perfectly ripe and ready to go. So these yeast in the air are like, whoa, we got a beautiful orange tree. So we're going to fly into that thing. And next thing you know, they start eating the sugars and the allium. And then and you know how yeast work, it starts burping up. And so the yeast,
yeah,
they burp and they have this release of carbon dioxide, which makes things grow. And this is how dough works, right? So
yeah.
same kind of thing. And so what I said was, put more garlic, less honey, and then put it in the refrigerator. What the refrigerator does, temperature, is it slows down that yeast. It actually it's like it tranquilizes the yeast a little bit. And so you put it in there, it's going to make them feel like they're like they're drunk, and they're not going to eat as much, and they're not going to burp as much, and it's just going to slow it down. So you can actually probably get away with it with the ratios, or you just have to be very very conscious of it and look at it every day and making sure and make adjustments. But I think overall it was just your ratios that was off.
And this gets back to something that I was reflecting on. I love being incredibly intuitive when it comes to cooking. I love experimenting. I love throwing
Yep.
stuff together and seeing what happens. But with fermentation, with pickling, you can't do that. At least in the beginning, you have to be very intentful. You have to be very scientific. It's like I've started experimenting a lot with baking and trying different things, but it
Hmm.
spent years of me building a basis of baking knowledge to be able to go, oh, I can do this, and I know this will happen, and this will change this factor, so I'll change this factor to account for that change. The same thing with pickling, the same thing with fermentation. You need to be very, very exact. But I love experimenting, and so sometimes I have to like check in with myself, like, what is the best way for me to invest my energy? How specific do I need to be? How do I balance creativity and science?
Okay. And that's a really good point. And what I want to say to that is two things. Culinary is the artistic way.
Yeah.
Baking is the science.
Yeah.
You have to be so specific with baking. And that's why in any baking recipe, I am going to find out what the weight of the product is because I want it exact. Because you can pull a cup of flour and you don't know if that's a cup of flour. You got to sit there and hit it against the counter, take and scrape off, then hit it again. But exactly what, 50 grams of flour is. It's exactly 50 grams.
Yeah.
And so when you measure things by volume versus weight, you're always going to get an exact word on weight. And so pickling is almost the same way because pickling is a science, and you have to have those ratios on point in order to get this harmonious, beautiful product that is going to develop over time with the right temperature.
Yeah.
I keep bringing it up. So,
It's because time and temperature is the basis of everything.
yeah, it kind of
Basis of,
is.
like, life and stuff too. Like when you think about it, time and
Yeah.
temperature. Oh, we could get into it, but yeah, you're completely right when it comes to that. It's very, very exact.
Hmm.
And I had a thought that escaped me, so
So
brain.
let's talk about pickling. I guess the three different types of pickling that I like to do, or that are pretty most common. Fermentation we talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
Vinegar brine pickling, and vinegar brine is a mixture of vinegar, water, salt, sugar, and spice. And something I said to you when we were talking about the garlic stuff is that, or wait, no, this was a pro week prior. You were asking me some questions on fermentation and all that, and I said, before you start throwing in different spices or different additives to flavor your pickles, start with the basic. Start with sugar, water, salt, and vinegar. Get that process down, and so take that process. Maybe make here's what I've done before. Is you do let's go 4 mason jars. You have maybe let's use pickled jalapenos. Put a jalapeno in each one of them, and then take it and do the same recipe in all 4. Um, you're gonna get the pretty much close to the same recipe, but all of them are going to be a little bit different. And you'll be able to take like one jar and you can put it in your cabinet. Take one jar, put it in your refrigerator. Take one jar and maybe put it in your garage, and see what happens on the basis of the environment. Because our environment affects everything. I know pizza nerds that are out there that will bring their own water to an event because their water is specific to their dough. So, and that tells me that environments are very specific to a product. Even to the point of I can go on the east side to a pizza restaurant, eat their dough, and then I can eat one over here on the west side. It's different.
Yeah.
Very minute, but it's different because of the microorganisms that are in the air and the water.
Yeah.
So back to the experiment. So take that and then, I'll put some tape on there and just make notes. garage temperature, average temperature, the time that it was in there. And then, and this is the fun part, is you get to take those when they're done with the pickling process, and you get to do like a little tasting party. And this is where the nerd of me comes out, because as I'm talking about this, I'm like, oh, I'm doing this again. So, uh, um, but
Invite me
like,
over when you do that, please.
yeah,
I
exactly.
wanna be
Like
on the guest list. Best red
these
carpet event.
these type of things are like, this is where you start to learn and to understand the development of a certain process. And we're talking about this because in pickling, the development is of the process is so crucial. You can't say, what if you got your pickling liquid and you're like, oh, you know what, I want to make this a little spicy, and you threw something in it, and it, maybe it discolored the brine, or it threw off the microorganisms a little bit, and then you got some rancid stuff there. So understanding what you can use by process of elimination, and where you're going to get the best results, is the way to do it. If you've never pickled before, anybody listening to this, if you've never pickled before, find a basic pickling brine. Everybody, we all have Google somewhere in our lives. Type it in and just give it a shot. It's super easy. You can even do a process which is called quick pickling.
That's what I've done before. It's a great way to start.
It is a really good way to start. And what I recommend there is go grab a carrot, peel it, cut it, or even shred it, because you really want it super thin. Put it in a little bowl. Throw some, get your vinegar brine, mix it up. Now there's two food for thoughts here on the brine. So this is a good place to kind of transition into that. Some people like to take the brine, put it on the stove, heat it up until the sugar dissolves. Some people like to put it on the counter, stir it up, let the sugar dissolve naturally. But in a quick pickle process, let's stick to the quick part. You know what I mean? Let's stay quick, and let's go put it on the stove, heat it up, not to a boil, just to a very, 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 very small simmer. Make sure that sugar has dissolved, and then take it, put it into your container with whatever, let's say shredded carrots right now, throw it in the fridge, let it sit in there for 30 minutes, pull it out, try those carrots. And you're going to find that this is a really fun process, because it works well with onions. It works well with celery. It works well with pretty much any vegetable, cabbage, that you can cut very thinly. Now, I don't want, okay, I wrote in my notes here that I don't want to go into pickling meat, because that is a
Whole other entity, yeah.
whole other entity. So
Oh,
we're
yeah.
gonna stick to vegetables. Maybe we'll do a show on meat, but the
That would be
meat,
fun.
yeah, the meat is a whole different thing, because that brings all kinds of different microorganisms to the jar, and that's a. Let me just say, if anybody out there has had pickled herring, please comment on the board, because I've had it once, and I've seen people like throw up just from opening the container. It is, let's just say, an acquired taste. I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm not going to say it's good. It's an acquired taste. There are people out there that like it. I, for myself, not a fan, but that's okay. But it's something you got. Maybe you should try if you got a strong enough stomach. But so quick pickling is such a good process of learning, but also like, go pickle some onions and put them on your burger next time you make burgers,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's super easy to do. You can find, and I referenced the Google machine. That's the
When in
beautiful
doubt,
thing.
Google it out. That's what you gotta do.
Go out there and find a recipe, because or email me, I'll give you a recipe. I have a couple books on pickling, which reminds me I was going to give you one of those. So Sarah, so in the idea of pickling, like, how did you adjust the garlic?
So right now I have my garlic and honey jars in the fridge. I haven't adjusted it yet, but I just want to slow down that fermentation by lowering the temperature like you suggested. I
Yeah.
plan to go in and get a really stupidly big jar, pack it full of even more garlic, and then combine my mixtures to make sure that there's more equilibrium with the sugars out in the garlic and the microorganisms on the outside. Make sure they're equal.
Hmm.
That's what I'm planning to do with that regard. When it
Okay.
comes to pickling in general, I feel like there's multiple levels to it. Like you have different like types and methods. And when you were talking about quick pickling, there's a couple of thoughts that really came to mind.
Okay.
Like especially when you were talking about like chopping your vegetables really thinly, that's so the pickling mixture can saturate them more quickly, right?
Right.
Especially
Break
with
through it.
too. By
Hmm.
raising the temperature, you make it so the molecules can like converge at a faster rate. Would you say
Correct.
that's accurate?
That is accurate, and think about it as like if you put it under a microscope in it, you see like the cell development in a piece of let's say carrot, and so the thinner it is, obviously, the faster that acidic level can penetrate and really transform the vegetable into what we know as a pickle.
Yeah.
So, and that's why it's called quick pickling is because of that. And you're not going to take a whole carrot unscathed and just put it in pickling liquid and get
That would,
something out of
yeah.
there in 30 minutes. You'll get a carrot. So,
Yeah,
uh,
with a little bit of acidity just like dripping off of it. Uh,
exactly. But let's talk a little bit about the preservation part, because I think I skipped over that a little bit. And the idea of preservation is being able to extend the shelf life of a product, right? And that's the whole point of what we're talking about with pickling. But how do you do that? It's I guess traditional methods is a mason jar, and if anybody that probably listens to the show has seen a mason jar, and if you look at that lid, it has the little thin part that has like the rubber seal around it. It's for pickling, it's for jams, it's for sealing that. And now being able to seal it is a pretty easy process. They make stuff, these big pots out there that you can put the jars into the boiling water, and what that does is that actually seals and shuts it down to be airtight, because that in an idea of preservation, just like I was talking about with the clay pots underground with the kimchi, you have to have it airtight, um, or else you might get a reaction like you got, right, with the yeast sneaking in there.
yeah.
Or think about like in terms of airtight versus how you make a sourdough starter. You've made a sourdough starter before, right?
Attempted to make a sourdough
Okay.
starter. Did not
So
go well. My
a
scale
sou-
was off, so I couldn't get the grams exact.
so a sourdough starter is really created through the natural yeast in the air. And you're just taking flour and water. And I'm just going to say very simply, I don't want to get onto the tangent of sourdough starters right now, but you put flour and water, you put it in a jar, loose lid, and put it on your counter. And after a series of, taking stuff out and feeding it and taking stuff out and feeding it over the course of 5 days, you have this microorganism rich like starter dough that has grown probably about times five of where it started, um, and that's because of everything that lives in the air. And this is why preservation is so key, and having a technique is because we don't see the microorganisms, all the yeast and everything floating around in the air that can affect our food, which is why food spoils. And so we gotta make that stuff airtight if we want to keep it. And it's really important that you go down that process and really understand that part is the one of the most important parts of pickling, for the simple fact that we don't want to make anybody sick. I can tell you my biggest single fear in the world of food is that one day I would make somebody sick.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that right there
it's
is
terrifying.
like, I mean, it's terrifying. It's debilitating. It's like, how would I ever cook again? Right? That's a little dramatic. I know. But in the terms of what we're doing by producing food for other people, the responsibility factor of making sure that your food is produced in a safe way so it doesn't make people sick, is the value of that is very high. And I can tell you from day one to right now, it is still the number one thing on my brain when I'm cooking, because I'm like, okay, how do I stay safe? How do I keep from cross contamination? When I'm making a dish with chicken, I'm always cutting the chicken last, right, on the cutting board, and those are some very basic and well known processes. But when it comes to preservation, you got to make sure that thing is airtight. And that's where that little like click, 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 click on the top of the mason jar will tell you. If it pops, it's not airtight. If you can't push it down, it's airtight because there's so much pressure in there that's keeping that lid down. So that's how you tell on a mason jar on whether or not it's good. So, and we all know that, like when we were, I don't know if you did, but like when I was a kid, the pickle jar lid where you could sit there and click it and it would be like click, 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 because after you open it, it's no longer airtight. And you start that time process of when that stuff's going to spoil, because you got all that microorganisms going into that jar. And next thing you know, they're eating it up, creating, bad bacteria.
Yeah, spoilage.
Exactly. That was a little bit of a rant right there, but I hope that I explained that part well, because that's the serious part of all this, right? That's the part of all this that is the responsible of the person who is cooking or making the product. One thing I can say about that is, like, and I've done this, if you're worried about it, taste it yourself. So, and the reason why I say that is because I am okay with making myself sick.
Yeah, be the sacrificial lamb. Yeah.
Yes. If I make myself sick, I am okay with that. If I make somebody else sick, it is going to be a complete, just like utterly, I don't want to, I got to stop. But luckily to this day, I have not done that. I don't know many people who have. Stuff does happen. Mistakes happen. Things get cross-contaminated and you don't know. But at the end of the day, safety is number one in the kitchen. There was one thing as I was going through school, and a couple of chefs that I worked with outside of school would demand you do. And there's a couple of reasons why they demanded this, but and I'll get into that, but they demanded that you tasted everything, right? And we all know that we got to taste our food as we cook it, because if we don't know what it tastes like, how are we going to prepare it for somebody else and say it's amazing, right? And we got to make sure it's seasoned. We got to make sure all this stuff. But it really starts to get into a gray area when you think about, what are you tasting? So like, I think it started to get a little weird with people in class when we're making French toast and you're tasting your raw egg custard.
Yeah.
And you're doing that to make sure that it is fully seasoned well and it's going to taste good. And then it's like, well, I'm going to get salmonella. No, you're not. I want to debunk that.
Pasteurization of eggs is a thing.
Pasteurization of eggs. Okay. So you're not going to get salmonella through that. First and foremost, that is the government, the whatever, whoever you want to, FDA, I don't know who you want to put it on. That is their way of saying we're going to keep a broad group of people safe through pasteurization. Okay. Well, what if you go down to your local, like, little farm store or farm and they're selling a carton of eggs? The one thing I'm going to say about that is that's okay. Wash the shell. A lot of those kind of diseases come through for what's on the shell of the egg. And you can actually go through with a little toothbrush and wash it off and put it back in your fridge. That's totally fine. Because what happens is somebody will crack an egg, some of the shell goes into the liquid. Well, whatever's on that shell is getting into the liquid, i.e. chicken poop. And nobody wants that in their liquid or their eggs, right? No. So safety. But definitely taste your food. Understand, use yourself as the sacrificial lamb. Go out there, practice some pickling things. I've put together a recipe of just a basic recipe of a quick pickle for a base. It's actually a slaw that I use on a pulled pork sandwich. I've also used it on a pastrami sandwich. And it's a fun little thing. It's carrot, cabbage, and a little bit of green onion, a little bit of red onion. And you put that in a bowl, and I'll post it on Max Effort Kitchen, the Instagram, just so y'all can see it. I know that I have a friend, also other co-host, Cornell. He asked me for your hot chocolate recipe, and I just got reminded that I did not send him that. So Cornell, if you are listening, I will send you that. Oops.
Please.
Yeah, because he questioned the cheese in the hot chocolate. If you guys didn't listen to the hot chocolate episode, go back.
That was a great episode. That one was awesome.
It really was.
I have a list of hot chocolates I'm trying to get through right now. I have a list of everything I'm trying to get through right now. I'm still working on porridge from like 3 months back, man.
Yeah. Well, just keep that list going, because that's not going to go bad, right? You're just going to keep marking it off the list. Well, we've hit 40 minutes. I think we did our best of getting out some common themes around pickling. If you have more questions, if you have any ideas, if you're like trying something and it's not working, you could hit either one of us up. I am at maxeffortkitchenproductions.com, or not .com, sorry, at Instagram. And Sarah, where can they find you?
Sarah Soares Chef at Instagram. Yeah. I don't know why I named myself a mouthful, but I gotta make things hard for everyone, including myself,
Yes. And that's okay. You can always change it, right?
True.
But you don't have to either. Anyways, I tag Sarah in all of these shows, so you can find her there. You can just go to a follow list, or reach out to me and I'll send it to you. But we are great resources. Hit us up if you have questions. Get out there and pickle something, and see how it works, and then make it yours. So Sarah, thank you very much for joining the show. I will say that we took a little bit of a role reversal this time. I did more of the talking. So I hope that people like that, because usually I let Sarah do more of the talking because she's a little more articulate. Yeah. She's like, you're a little more articulate than I am. So. We'll go there.
Making Mama proud.
Yeah. I usually let you do the talking for that reason. But anyways, everybody, thank you for listening. This has been a great show for the love of food, and we will see you all next time. Adios.
Bye.